Hi, and welcome to another webcast of A Mirror Darkly. Today is our 30th broadcast, as far as I can count. I can count further than
Yeah,
that.
I was going to say, you only count to 30?
Yeah, but that's as far as I've counted.
Oopsie.
I think I've counted all of them.
Well, we have a couple of announcements to make, too.
Okay.
One announcement is that it is this girl's birthday right here. She is 23 now.
Yep.
So we'll be going out to celebrate her birthday after. I'm still inviting people, but that's not part of the announcement. The other announcement is that we are going to be grandparents in March.
Yes.
So our oldest daughter is pregnant.
Yep.
We do not know the gender yet.
Probably find out next month.
Yeah. So, today I went by the Carter's Oshkosh store and was like, I want to go in. But I
No.
resisted the temptation because we don't have any money.
Yeah.
But yes, I will be a frequent visitor there. I will download their app and take advantage of their specials
Yeah.
because I love those clothes.
Okay. Well, today's topic is freedom of the press, which you would think would not be a particularly controversial topic, but then you probably haven't watched the news lately either. It's the oddest thing. Last week we did freedom of speech, and this kind of many of the same problems and arguments go along with this
There we go.
issue as well. One of the things that's fascinating about the issue, of course, is that the definition of press has changed over the years. It used to be, just printing presses, and the old-fashioned kind where it's movable type and all of that, and that's not the most common way that we get the news anymore. Most of our news comes to us either online or we watch television.
24-hour news channels.
The 24-hour news channels. Plus then, and this is part of the controversy that people have, I suppose, is that press, both in its original incarnation as well as now, is not necessarily restricted just to quote-unquote professionals. That is, if you blog, if you have a website, any of those sorts of platforms should have the same kind of protection constitutionally as CNN or the New York Times.
Oh, Angie says hi. Hi, Angie.
Ah.
I should wave at the camera, not at the
Yeah,
laptop.
the laptop's not going to. They'll wonder who you're waving at over there in the other part of the room. And then, of course, there's controversy as to what is appropriate to print, what is tied in what's appropriate.
Why'd you look at me when you said appropriate? Am I inappropriate?
No, I just was looking that direction.
You're like,
Where
appropriate.
Where I look has little to do with anything. Just ask people on Sunday morning when I'm preaching.
True.
Oh, by the way, Brittany, Angie likes your shirt, but I will tell her that it's a dress, and she's dressed up for her
Can't
birthday
really
dinner.
tell because you're
Yeah, you're gonna
camera-
fall and
don't-
break your neck.
or damage something. There's a lot of cheap electronic equipment
It's
here.
We can't afford
a
to
dress.
replace.
It's a dress. Thank you, though.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I
fine.
kind of caused that. So okay, let's move on.
So people wonder, you have criticism of things that get published online. This is the source of a lot of the controversy, is what people publish online, what they tweet. The number of platforms and options that we have available in the modern world for getting our opinions across are quite wide. And some people wonder whether or not it's appropriate that people be able to just freely say whatever they want, even if it's controversial or unpleasant or unkind. And the reality is that, yes, ultimately there are virtually no restrictions, at least in the United States, on what people can say, what they can print, unless you are explicitly
Inciting violence.
inciting violence, or saying that, on this day at this time I'm going to do such and such bad thing to you. Anything outside of that, you pretty much can say whatever you want, even if it's very unkind. I mentioned last week a columnist for the National Review. She's libertarian, and Kat Timpf is her name. And she wrote an article where she encourages complete freedom of speech and freedom of the press, despite the fact that she herself has been victimized by people making threats, saying very unkind things to her. She would wish, of course, that they wouldn't say unkind things to her, but nevertheless, that is our right.
Right. Well, and I think that's something important to remember, is that you have freedom of speech or freedom of the press, but then those people
Can
also
react
have,
to you.
and you have to expect those reactions. If you don't like the reactions, then don't say anything.
Yeah.
Don't give your opinion. Don't give your opinion.
Well, you can
No,
give
you
your
can
opinion.
give your opinion, and if you do so, then you need to be willing to, well, it's going to come whether you're willing or not.
Right.
There's going to be a reaction to what you say, reaction to what you print, reaction to what you write, and you should be willing and able to handle that. It always shocks me when I see so-called journalists getting all upset because somebody has criticized something they've written or said. And it's like, well, that's the way it works.
Yeah, especially if it's an opinion piece.
Yeah, particularly
And
it's an
there are
opinion
a
piece. Well, even if
lot of
it's
opinion
even if
pieces.
it's not an opinion piece, that is, journalists, whether they're professional or not, they make mistakes of fact too, and sometimes one wants to counter that. I use the example all the time just because it's so egregious, as well as the fact that the guy's dead now, so it doesn't matter. He wrote a book in 1999 called The Coming Economic Earthquake, and what was his name?
Larry Burkett?
Yeah, Larry Burkett. And the book is horrific. It's very poorly done, factually inaccurate throughout. Somebody had lent me the book and said, "Oh, this is a great book. You should read it."
Gosh, Christians just ate it up. Was it
Yes.
back in the 90s?
It was
I
published
think?
by Moody Press. It came out in '99.
Yeah.
And yeah, it actually won awards. And I'm looking at the thing wondering why, because it was just that bad.
Because people like apocalyptic literature.
Yes, but it was factually inaccurate.
Right.
And the factual inaccuracies are not a matter of opinion or, well, you could look at it two different ways. No, it was along the lines of saying the sky is green. That is, he argued that the Kaiser of Germany was involved in the inflation that occurred in Weimar Germany. And the difficulty with that is, of course, that the Kaiser had abdicated and was living in Holland from the end of World War I on. He had nothing to do with the Weimar Republic whatsoever, so he couldn't have had any involvement in it. You had statements of error against other, well, you had the author blaming the removal of silver from our coinage. He blamed Richard Nixon for that. Well, the removal of silver from coinage occurred in 1964, which is 4 years before Nixon was even elected president, let alone entered the White House. And he wasn't involved in government or politics at any level at that point. He'd run for governor of California and lost. He'd made the comment at that point that you won't have me to kick around anymore. Apparently Larry Burkett wanted to go ahead and keep kicking him even though he had nothing to do with what happened. But, Moody Press had as much right to print that pile of garbage as anyone does, but then
They made a lot of money off of it.
they made a lot of money off of it, and nobody was any the wiser. I wrote to Larry Burkett. I got blown off. Although it's interesting, they did come out with a second edition of that book. Second edition excised all the things that I had
Interesting.
criticized.
You
Of
didn't
course,
get any
I got no mention.
no mention or no royalties from
And no,
your editing
and no
efforts.
apology or anything. Oh, we made mistakes.
Uh-huh.
Just those things weren't there anymore. Of course, the problem was when you removed all the things that they had done wrong in the book, the argument of the book was non-existent then. That is, their foundation for what they were arguing in the book was a series of facts that weren't so.
I wonder if anybody's still like passing that book around.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I mean, like I said, the book won awards.
Well, and the thing is that in the 90s, the internet was still so new, it wasn't easy to do searches like
He
it is
could
now.
have looked in an encyclopedia and
I
corrected the
know,
mistakes.
but I'm saying for other people reading it, for the average Joe Christian reading it, going, is this accurate? See, now we can just type it in, and I do that all the time. People say something was the way that it was in history. I just type it in and see if it's true.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's my opinion of journalism in general tends to be relatively low because I've been involved in it. I wrote a newspaper column for over 10 years. I worked in media relations with the when Spaceship One launched and they won the X Prize, the $10 million X Prize. And in dealing with them, a lot of them just are not that competent. That is, Larry Burkett does not stand out as unusually bad as an author or a writer. He just is an example I like to use because it was so egregious and because I wrote to him and he blew me off, and so fine, he's a reasonable target. I tried to be nice, and there you go. And he's dead anyway, so who cares? Can't libel or slander the dead.
No.
Now that's the other aspect of things, and the bar, particularly in the United States, is very high for libel or slander, which helps protect the press and the tendency towards incompetence. Napoleon Bonaparte is quoted as saying at one point when he had a general that had really screwed up and people were accusing the general of being a traitor, and Napoleon said, no, probably not. It's better to don't ascribe to malice what is more easily explained by stupidity and incompetence. And generally speaking, that's what we find with that. I mentioned before the Gell-Mann effect. Gell-Mann was a physicist, and he noticed every time he read a newspaper article on physics that was always wrong. And it would annoy him, and he'd shake his head and roll his eyes, and then he'd turn the page and read something else in the newspaper and just accept it at face value. And at one point, this happened. He read an article on physics that was wrong, turned the page, and then he asked himself, if on topics that I know, they're always wrong, why should I think that on things that I don't know anything about, that they're any closer to being accurate? And anyone who has seen a story in the newspaper or television that you knew what was going on in the story, inevitably you see all sorts of errors in what they do. This is the way it is across the whole thing. Nevertheless, the press must be free to do whatever they do, and libel and slander laws need to have a very high bar of evidence, because just because the journalist is stupid, that is, journalist has to actually be malicious and malevolent. They have to know that what they're saying is wrong, and you have to be able to prove that they knew what they were doing was wrong before you have a case. And so your odds, particularly if you're a public figure, of getting a slander libel thing done, virtually nil.
That's probably why most of those things go to civil court rather than criminal court.
No,
Or is that just civil
it's
litigation?
always civil
Oh,
litigation. And again, the bar is so high that it's virtually impossible to win a libel or a slander case, which is actually a good thing.
Right.
Because you don't want to make it easy for people to intimidate the press.
Right.
That is, the press needs to have the freedom without worry that they can say pretty much anything at all. Or write anything at all. You don't want to get in trouble for that.
That Gell-Mann effect thing that you were talking about, it reminds me of a conversation I had with someone one time. I was talking about the guy who did the basic youth conflicts and how wrong he was in so many things, and that it
Pretty
didn't
much
matter
everything.
what he said, I mean, he was a single man with no children who was telling parents how to have happy marriages and how to raise your children. And a lot of damage was done to a lot of Christian kids and a lot of Christian families because of that. And this person, very well-meaning, very intelligent person, said to me, well, does that mean that anything he says you wouldn't believe him? And I said, yeah, pretty much, because he's wrong on so many things. This thing that I don't know about, I wouldn't trust what he says. I would definitely check it out. So kind of like those people that, if their lips are moving, they're lions. If they say...
You mean politicians?
Yeah, those people. So then if they say the sky is blue, you go outside and check just to be sure, because you can't believe anything they say.
Yeah.
So I would definitely fact check that person if I was going to believe anything they said at all.
Yeah.
So... and the person was super offended that I didn't trust anything the person said, and I really backed down on it because I could see it was hurting his feelings, but because I didn't want to hurt that individual person.
Right.
But my point is still valid, and what I believe about him is true. Is that he didn't know what he was talking about, and he made a lot of money off of it. And it was kind of a secret society thing. Couldn't get the notebook unless you went to the seminars, basic youth conference.
Yeah, it was very when I was in college, it was very I never went to it.
And my dad went to it.
And I wasn't interested really in going to it. And I'm glad I never went to it.
My dad went to it, and a lot of the rules I had when I was being raised came out of that, and a lot of the rules that the teenagers in our churches had were because of that.
And it's remarkably ineffective.
Yes, yes, it is.
As well as, a lot of the underlying ideas in it are simply wrong. The stress on hierarchy and authority and all of that, I'm completely opposed to, and I think is counter to the gospel message as a whole. But yeah, if you happen to have a copy of any of those, just go and try to look up some of the verses he uses, and you'll discover that either the verse has nothing, that you wonder why did they even use this verse, or it's completely out of context.
Right.
So again, just not reliable or trustworthy.
There is a copy of in my dad's stuff. We have a notebook.
I've got copies at home of it. We've got copies in the church library here. But yeah, I would never make use of the material any more than I'd make use of anything that Larry Burkett wrote. Although he's still very popular, his books, if you do a search, you'll find they're out there, very popular, 4 or 5-star reviews. And no. So yeah, if you read, generally speaking, and this is the difficulty both with press, is the press, when you think in terms of newspapers, websites, 24-hour news channels, is that you don't have enough perspective given to you to be able to really understand what's going on. An assumption is, part of the reason that we have the requirement that people go to school, get through high school, encourage people to go to college, is the hope that people will gain perspective, that is, learn history, learn economics, learn all these things, and so they'll have that background so that they can more clearly judge what they're being told from the press. And the sad, cold reality is most people have no idea about history, economics, science, any of those things. And so they can't judge what the press is saying, whether it's true or not.
She knows we have Hazel, right? It's not supposed to be back in. Okay.
Okay, well, you can talk to her later.
Okay, I'll just tell her later.
What was I talking about? Lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I couldn't figure out what the noise was.
Yeah,
either,
that.
So. The person cleaning the church
Cleaning
today
the church is
vacuuming, and it's
which
loud.
was unnecessary
Yeah.
because we have a robot that does that.
Yeah. We need to put the vacuum cleaner in the very back. It hasn't been moved back there yet.
Okay.
So that's partly our fault.
Yes.
We're talking about Larry Burkett.
Larry Burkett and reliability
Basically,
perspective.
Oh yeah, perspective. Well, and it's design, and part of the reason for public education, so you have an educated electorate, because
Right,
you
well,
can't
that's
have
why
a
you-
government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
If everybody's stupid.
Right. And
Although we should be thankful that such a small percentage of people actually vote, because those are the ones that probably have more of a clue than
right. Right.
others that aren't voting. The other reason we have low turnout is simply because things are not that bad, so people don't really care.
Yeah.
I mean, if things were really going to hell in a handbasket, then we'd have 95% participation rate in the voting, but because for most people their lives are more or less okay. And again, perspective helps with this. That is, if you look at the news, you think everything is going to hell in a handbasket, but if you actually look at the data, statistics of what's actually happening, you realize that, wait, this is the most peaceful, most prosperous time in world history ever.
I know why she's doing that. We're out of Swiffer juice because
No, we've got Swiffer juice.
Oh, it is there?
Yes, it
Oh,
is
is it
there.
in the thing?
It's in the.
Is it stuck in the mop?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
stick
she may
it
not
on.
know how to stick it in the
Ah,
mop.
okay.
Okay. Anyway, it's like bugging
It's
me.
bothering you.
Yeah.
So yeah. Hard to focus when real life continues to go on around us, isn't it?
Yes.
We don't have a real sound booth or sound. Well, we have a sound booth, but we don't have a real studio.
Right.
That's the word I want.
Someday.
Someday.
We'll build a studio.
We'll turn. Well, we want
So-
to turn the one office that we have here,
Yeah.
that's just a storeroom at this point, back into something useful, and turning it into a
Studio
studio would
seems
be
to-
a reasonable
Yeah.
choice. Hi, you came back.
So we were talking about
Why are you, like, so close to
people voting, same close as he was before. Nobody
Yeah.
moved a
Just
muscle.
move the chair if it bothers you.
It's like I'm sitting on it.
Um,
Dad.
It got dirty.
so
I was
anyway,
working on
Birthday.
sprinklers earlier.
Sorry about that.
talking about, we're so distracted.
Yes, we are today.
Um,
Well, some days are
My
that
fault. That's
way.
my fault. That was my fault.
No, just the way it happened to work out.
No, that last.
Oh, about things not being bad,
Mm-hmm.
but people are like creating bad,
Well,
hoping that
One
there will
of-
be some bad.
Well, one of the weird things about human nature is that, from a survival standpoint, focusing on bad is a survival mechanism. Is if you see this, if you looked at the Washington Monument, this big white pillar, and there was a little tiny spot of black paint on it, where would your eye go? The little spot of black. The whole rest of it is perfectly fine, but you look at the little tiny dot that's not right.
Right.
And that's what you focus on, perseverate on, worry about. We got to fix that.
Yeah.
And news always is going to focus on what's wrong.
On the little black spot.
On the little black spots in the world. Because the little black spot, the problems are unusual. The problems are the less common thing in the world. That is, if the news were to start reporting Flight 731 from Dallas to Los Angeles landed safely today, if that's the news story, there's some serious problems.
Well, then that means there's no bad news.
No, it means that bad news is so common that it's not interesting.
Oh, I see. Okay.
See,
I was thinking,
the reason bad news.
that's all there is to report is good news.
No, that
The sun is
means
shining, the birds are singing.
No, we'll find something wrong. And
This is CNN.
Yes, well, we're going to find something wrong, and that's what we're going to report on because that's what's interesting. That's what's out of the ordinary. If it bleeds, it leads, as the saying goes. But that's because bleeding is not as common as not bleeding.
Right.
As most people go about their daily lives, they go to work, they go to the park, they go to the store, they drive around, they go home, they watch TV, they go to bed, and repeat the process the next day. Nobody wants to hear about that. The guy that decides to go out and machine gun his coworkers, that will be news because that doesn't happen very often. It's what doesn't happen all the time that makes the news. And because that's all we see on the news, particularly the 24-hour variety, we think, well, that's all that's actually happening in the world. This is one of the problems that firefighters, paramedics, doctors, lawyers, police officers, soldiers, one of the problems with being in those kind of professions is that your whole job is focused on things that go wrong. It is you're meeting people on their worst day,
Yeah.
and that's all you do all the time. That's really going to skew your view of how the world is versus someone that is not in that kind of, like if you're a therapist, again, your whole 8-hour shift is dealing with people's problems.
And people that are mentally ill, and you're
people
like,
that-
you think everybody's mentally ill.
Right.
Like, you're a hammer, so everybody becomes a nail.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's true with teachers who have been teaching for a long time. I remember when I was a new teacher, I'd hear the I don't even want to call them the veteran teachers. I'm going to call them the old teachers, because there's an attitude about an old teacher where they're like, man, their faces look like this and all
Yes.
that, and like they just sucked on a lemon. And they were saying when I was saying, oh, I'm worried about the next generation, and if these are the people that are going to be working to pay for my Social Security and blah, 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 which teachers can't collect anyway. At that point they could, but we can't anymore. And now that I'm in that veteran teacher position, I hear the old teachers, oh, I'm worried about the next generation. If these are the people that are going to be paying my Social Security, which we don't collect on. But, it's funny because I remember hearing that, because I thought to myself, I don't want to be that teacher. And, day to day, I become that person. Like, I'll just have a really bad day, and I'm like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I want to retire. This generation's worthless. Can't do it.
But every generation says that about the new generations.
Yeah.
And it's always been that way.
Yeah.
And this is why perspective is such an important thing.
And you try to tell people that, and they don't believe you.
No, they don't.
They don't believe you.
They
You
do
say, well,
not.
that's what our parents said about us. That's what our grandparents said about that. No, they didn't.
Yeah, they
Because
did.
this generation's really bad. It's like, no,
No.
it's just that way. They're
Yes.
young and they're stupid. They don't have frontal lobes. When they get a frontal lobe, they'll act more like us.
Yeah. And that's what will annoy me in
Andrew
watching.
said LOL.
And that's what will annoy me in watching news is the utter lack of perspective. They'll talk about, well, this is the worst thing that ever. No, it's not. Again, if you have perspective, you realize, yeah, we've got some problems. Every era has its problems. I mean, you have the song that what's his name did. We didn't start the fire.
Billy Joel.
Billy Joel. And part of his motivation in
Sorry,
writing the
Joel.
song was exactly this kind of thing, the lack of perspective. That is, people thinking, well, this is the worst it's ever been. And so he goes through from like the 50s up to when he wrote the song, and it's just one bad thing after another, because that's the way life is. There are always things that go wrong.
Right. And if you look at it, I was pointing this
And
out.
it's no worse today than it has ever been. And actually, like I said, this is the most peaceful, most prosperous
Yeah.
time in world history. There is less violence now, criminal. There's less war. There's less, all the bad stuff is less now.
Way less starvation.
Way less starvation. In fact, the UN set a goal by 2025, I think it was, or 2035.
I was talking about this in Sunday school, and you weren't there. You were gone to pick up Mary, and I
Oh.
couldn't recite the
But in
statistics.
it was 2025, the UN says a goal is to eliminate extreme poverty. And extreme poverty is defined as anybody that's living on $2 a day or less. I think that's what it is. I could be wrong. Fact check me on this. Go to the UN website, you'll get all the information. But anyway, it has declined from when they started the thing at 90% of the world was living in that state. Now it's less than 10%. And they actually think that they will have eliminated extreme poverty before that date.
Well, they might have to
faster than they thought.
redefine extreme poverty too, because as
Well, no,
the planet gets wealthier.
Well, the dollar figure they use, whatever it is inflation adjusted
Oh,
figure.
okay.
So it's not just that we're inflating ourselves out of it. It's actually that the amount of prosperity has increased so much, and the number of people that are living in those kind of conditions has lessened so much that things actually are getting better. If you humanprogress.org, I think, is the website. But go to the UN statistics, the CIA fact book, any of them, you can get this information. Things are getting better overall. The number of countries that are free, democratic, has increased over the years. The number of dictatorships has gone. I mean, all the things that you would want to go down are going down. The things that you'd want to get better are getting better. Two books that I'd recommend. Better Angels
The coming economic earthquake.
is not one of them. Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, and his more recent book that Bill Gates freed all the college students of that year when it came out, Enlightenment Now. Enlightenment Now is probably an easier book to read just because it's not as heavy on the statistics and it's not as big and fat. I mean, The Better Angels of Our Nature is this huge, huge thing. It's well worth it, but I know a lot of people don't like to read that level of stuff. That
Maybe he gave that one to the college students so they wouldn't cry.
perhaps.
Just teasing.
But Enlightenment Now covers many of the same things. Matt Ridley, he has a website. He wrote a book called The Rational Optimist a few years ago. Any of these things really help with your perspective. Peter Diamandis, who created the X Prize, he wrote a book called Abundance Now, covers much of the same sort of information. That is, things are actually getting much, much better overall. And you don't get that perspective from the news. You get that from things that people don't bother reading because it's too big and complicated,
And you actually have to turn
and you
pages.
actually have to turn pages.
Or
Plus,
go like this on your Kindle.
the other weird thing is you are likely to be more respected and to get more positive press if you predict doom and gloom than if you predict things are actually getting better. That is, what's his name? Paul Ehrlich wrote a book back in the 60s called The Population Bomb. Every single prediction he made in the book was wrong. In fact, none of his predictions have ever been right. He had a bet with a guy named Singer a few years ago on commodity prices for various, like copper and basic things that we need. And the bet was that Singer predicted that the cost of these things would drop, that they would plunge. And Ehrlich was predicting, no, the prices would rise, we'd have shortages, all this. And the bet was that Ehrlich would have to, whoever it is that lost would have to pay the other one. Well, Ehrlich lost the bet and had to pay through the nose for the loss of the bet because the way it worked was based on the percentage of increase or decrease, and it decreased so much he had to pay, I think it was over $500 to pay off the bet.
Wow.
So anyway, because the drop in commodity prices was so severe, which was a good thing, not a bad thing.
Right.
But Paul Ehrlich is still respected. People pay attention to him. They listen to him. People that talk like him, people listen to him. And they are always, without fail, wrong. But people like doom and gloom.
Right.
And you get people like you, and they will respect you and think that you're a
Support you.
deep thinker and that you're a wonderful person because you're predicting all these horrible things. And those that predict that things are not going to be horrible, nobody pays attention to them. They're just Pollyannas, they're stupid, they don't know any better, and yet they're the ones that keep being right.
Right.
So again, Matt Ridley, Peter Diamandis, who else died?
I don't know.
Coming,
I blew up your brain.
yeah, I blew.
Paul somebody.
No.
Was it Paul somebody?
That was Ehrlich. You don't want to read anything he wrote.
Okay, never mind.
He's
Just trying to
a waste
remember a
of
name you
time.
mentioned.
Yeah. So The Better Angels of Our Nature, the author of that book, and Enlightenment Now. Much.
Well, I was making the point in Sunday school that we're wealthier than Solomon, have way more knowledge than Solomon, and we're actually healthier because we have things like antibiotics. My gallbladder disease that I had, I would have died from, 50, 60 years ago. Well, maybe not, because my grandmother had gallbladder surgery, but, probably back in the early 1900s or late 1800s, as recent as then, I would have died from that. And so just simple things that we fix so easily now. I mean, I was in the hospital one night, took me about 2 weeks worth of basic recovery, and then after a couple of years, it's like I never had it out.
Yeah, well,
you
somebody
know?
pointed out once that your average middle class person in the Western world lives better than a billionaire did in 1900. That is, you're better off than what's his name, Rockefeller was in 1900. It is, you have access to entertainment that would be unimaginable to him. You have air conditioning. You have health care that's far better.
You have cars and more than one.
Yes, your selection of food. That was one of the things that I found fascinating. That is, you can get an orange any time of the year. Not then,
Yeah.
and so on. For that matter, bananas, you'd have been hard pressed to get a hold of a banana even in 1900. Bananas first, slightly before 1900, the Columbian Exposition 1892, that was a big thing at that exposition, is bananas. And so that encouraged then, I think it was Dole, they figured out a way to transport them so they didn't get bad from where they transport to the wet. And so bananas then became a staple and very popular in Western society as a consequence of that. Before that period, you couldn't get bananas. Now they're an everyday thing. So anyway, freedom of the press is an important part of all of this. Now, the value of the press is that, ideally at least, they keep tabs on what our elected officials are doing. Because you can't trust politicians. People are exceptionally critical of politicians of the party that they do not belong to. But the reality is the politicians of the party you do belong to and that you do like are equally corrupt and need to be checked on just as much. And it's unfortunate that you don't necessarily see an equal amount of picking on politicians.
Well, you do when the parties change the 24-hour news things change their tune.
Right.
You know, so like right now, CNN and all that is like, "Rah, rah, rah, rah," and Fox is like, yay!
Yeah, and of course, if it goes the other way, then they'll reverse there.
Yeah, then CNN will be like, yay! And Fox will be like, "Rah, rah, rah, rah."
So it works.
Yeah.
Historically speaking, the idea, and this is a recent weird thing, that the press can be an objective thing is nonsensical, because human beings, by their nature, are not objective. We like to imagine that we are rational beings motivated primarily by logic and clarity of thought. The reality is we're driven mostly by our emotions, and after the fact, then we will come up with justifications for why we've made the decisions we've made. Now, sometimes we will rationalize correctly, but not always. And again, we're driven more by emotion than we are by fact.
Well, in my efforts to view the last election more clearly, is I watched the Democratic National Convention on Fox, and then I watched the Republican convention on CNN, because I figured if I look at it through the opposite lens,
You get
that
a
will,
more likely,
a
view of
little
things.
clearer view.
Yeah, one of the
But now
two-
you can't watch anything through either because,
they're just completely nuts.
yeah,
One of the things that you want to understand, and this is where I was going with my point about people
sorry.
not being objective, is that because human beings by their nature are not objective, the press, because it's done by human beings, is not going to be objective by definition. And so what you want to recognize is that no matter what a news source tells you about, we're not biased, they're lying.
right.
Not necessarily consciously lying, they're lying to themselves. That is, they're imagining something that simply isn't possible. And so what you want, it used to be in the American journalistic world that you would have newspapers that would be for one party, and you'd have newspapers for another party, and so on. So you knew what exactly you were getting. I'd much prefer that system, because then right up front you are aware of what the biases are. They're not trying to pretend they don't have them.
Well, I think that's true now.
And if you do that, if you say, okay, these are my biases right up front, then it's a lot easier to make sense of what's going on. That is, you can see, okay, this person, and they acknowledge the fact that they are biased in this direction, so I know that's where it's coming
But
from.
I think you see that. I think it's very clear now.
It's getting clearer now.
Yeah, like the New York Times is obviously more.
Well, I'm not sure if because I think if you were to talk to the people at the New York Times, you talk to people at Washington Post or the LA Times or any of the different, or you talk to CNN or whatever, I don't think that they would acknowledge that they have a bias.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Right.
Is
But
that
by
pe-
reading what
that
they
people-
put out, you know they do.
Well, assuming that you don't also have the same bias. That is,
No,
if you-
because I know that Fox News is biased to the right.
Yes.
I know that CNN is biased to the left.
Yes, and MSNBC even a little bit further.
Oh, way farther.
What your best bet is in trying to figure out what's going on in the world is to make use of sources from several different perspectives. That is, be aware of your own biases, what it is. You know, Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. It'd be nice if more news source, more of the press would pay attention to that. Know what the biases are of the various sources, and then make sure that you read or peruse or watch all these different perspectives, because that will give you a better chance of discovering what the truth actually is. Now, the sad reality is most people don't really want to know the truth either.
Right.
They just want their beliefs to be massaged and reaffirmed, and yes, you're right. And the other people are stupid and wrong.
Right.
Um,
Well, because they are.
The pursuit of truth should be the primary thing that we as human beings would want. And so if truth is what you're really wanting to find, then make use of press that you know are coming from different biased points of view. And so, for instance, every day I read the LA Times, Washington Post, Reason Magazine, National Review. I get a fairly broad perspective on things that way. Look at The Nation, look at New Republic, both very much left-wing sources, The Nation even further than New Republic. Is look at a wide variety of things, because then you have a better chance of finding out what the truth is. That is, if a certain story is coming only from one particular point of view, then that should be your first clue to be very skeptical of it.
Right.
The other thing, too, is that you should be very skeptical of everything.
Right.
That is, you should be especially skeptical of things that reaffirm what it is you believe. Is if it's something that says, this particular politician you hate did this stupid thing, you should be skeptical of that. Because that's just reinforcing your negative view of that person.
Right.
It may or may not be the case.
The thing is that some stories, though, you have a really hard time getting that information on.
This is the weird thing, and that is
They
the
gloss
case.
over it completely. Like, oh, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Look at this shiny object over here.
This is the hard thing, and most people aren't going to want to do it. That is, I was a history major in college, and one of the things I was taught in my methodology class, that is how to do research and methodology class. I also had it as a graduate student at UCLA. I actually liked my undergraduate one better, maybe because the one I got at UCLA was just a repetition of what I had already learned, and so it's like, okay, I already know this, why am I having to do this again? But anyway, primary sources is what you want to try to get information from as much as possible. That is, don't depend on secondary and tertiary and on
Right.
and on sources. Try to get back to the actual thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with
But if it's something you don't have access
that's
to,
the problem, is that you don't always have access to it.
right?
And so all you can do then is just maintain a certain level of skepticism. And particularly, again, if it's reaffirming something that you already believe, you want to make sure that you're particularly skeptical of that. That is, constantly on Facebook, I'll see people, putting something, this proves the Bible. And it's like, no, that's bogus. But people will do that. Again, they have an emotional investment in their beliefs. And so anything that reaffirms their belief, they're going to naturally want to accept. You need to be as skeptical of those things that affirm what you believe as you would be of things that challenge what you believe. And this is an incredibly difficult thing to do and to get used to doing. But it's very important. And with the amazing amount of information we have at our fingertips now, you can't be any less skeptical now than you've ever been, because the same thing that afflicted 19th century yellow journalism afflicts modern 21st century journalism, which is just as yellow as it was back then.
Right.
It's no more trustworthy than it's ever been. Again, the Gell-Mann effect, keep that in mind. Don't trust anything. Try to find original source materials as much as you can, which
Well,
makes it hard, and people don't want to devote their lives to having to do that.
My union will send me flyers like, vote for this person, this person, this person. Well, first of all, I don't hold the same political opinions that my union does, so I generally use that as a warning, like, maybe don't vote for these people. But then I try to look at their stuff. I look at their websites. I go to ballotpedia.org. It's a great website, because like on propositions and stuff,
It gives you the actual
it gives you the
proposition.
actual proposition, and then I try to get through it, but it has so much legalese in it, some of them, it's hard to decipher what it means. So then I'll look kind of at the translation of it, and then I'll look to see who backs it, who doesn't back it. And there's a lot of other information there that can help you make your decision. And I really like ballotpedia.org. It's very good. So I will use that when it comes time to vote. And I encourage people to do that. And actually, when I teach government at the beginning of the year to my students, to my third graders, and we talk about the Constitution, we talk about the freedoms that we have as Americans. And I tell them that, I tell them, if you are a female or you're a person of color, you should make sure that when you turn 18, that you register to vote, because you've not always had that right. I said everybody should vote, regardless of the color of their skin or what their gender is, but definitely vote if you're female or a person of color, because you've not always had that right. Don't waste that right. And then I told them, you also are obligated, because we talk about the rights and responsibilities of citizens, it's your responsibility to know something about what you're voting for. And that you get
as
to
much
know
as
as much
possible.
information you can. And in our current world, it's super easy.
It's relatively easy.
It's way easier than it was
It's
before
much easier
that.
it was. But
And
you still have to use the tools of research, which are not obvious.
right.
Is going back to Larry Burkett and what he did in his book. If you look at his bibliography, you'll see that his source materials are all from the same political and economic point of view. And they are quoting from one another if you look at the actual sources. That's not the way you do research.
Right.
What you want to do is do a more broad spectrum thing and look at sources that are from different points of view, not just the one that you believe.
Right. Well, and like things
And
like
that's hard. It's
when
hard.
when people tell me something
It'll
is true,
change.
a person just told me this week that that aspartame turns to formaldehyde at 85 degrees. I said, well, that kind of doesn't make sense, because our bodies are 98.6.
A lot of that formaldehyde is something your body turns things into as well.
Okay, so that may actually be true then, but it's not.
It's not a weird thing, and it's part of the normal process.
Okay, so I didn't have time to really research it, and I wasn't that interested in the topic.
Yeah, people get scared. Formaldehyde. Well, that's something you take a dead thing and stick it in, and it doesn't rot. And
Right.
you don't want that in your body. Well, you've got that in your body because
Yeah.
that's one of the things that happens. the percentages and levels of things have a lot to do
Well,
with stuff.
these teething tablets I used to give my girls, they're not holistic. What's that word? Homeopathic. But they worked really well. That's why I used
Well,
them.
there's
But
probably something else in them.
well, I'm
that's-
finishing my
oh,
statement.
sorry.
They have belladonna in them. Well, belladonna is a poison, but
At
in the
certain
right
levels.
amount, it's a good teething thing. Now I think they took them off the market because there was something else about them that was bad. I don't know. My girls are fine, but the whole time they were teething, I carried those little
Yeah.
tablets around with me.
It's like water at certain levels can be deadly.
Yeah, like
you know, about this
yeah.
point, your feet are connected to the ground, you're
Yeah.
in bad shape.
Cement shoes and water don't go well together. Okay,
Okay.
that's fine. So, but yeah, you have to be careful what websites you look at. Like if I'm looking up medical information, I go to WebMD because it's very factual. It's like doctors submit things and it's stuff from like JAMA and things like that. It's not, I'm a healthnut.org. That's like one of my favorite
Yeah.
websites to quote that is not actually a website. But like people will say, oh, going gluten-free is really good for you. It's like, okay, well, where do you get your information? Oh, glutenfreecrazypeople.org. It's like, yeah, no, I'm good. So,
Yeah.
and all these like weird diets that people want you to go on and stuff
By the
like
way,
that.
Tony called me.
Okay.
She's at the house.
That's
Okay.
fine.
So I tell you.
Does she have Bella?
No.
Okay, I didn't
Okay.
think so.
So,
So we're about 7 minutes away. We still have a
we
little
still
bit
have a
of
little
time.
bit of time.
But you have to be really careful at what websites you're
And you
looking
want to
at.
do the
and,
research.
Yeah.
And-
Wikipedia is a good place to start, but it's not
Well, it's
the
like with
only
an-
place to do
well, it's
your
like
research.
with any encyclopedia, that is, people will get down on Wikipedia because anybody can edit it. But the reality of Wikipedia is it's as good as any encyclopedia has been good. I'd like to tell the story about Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
When I was taking Ugaritic, an odd Semitic language.
What?
It's a Semitic language. It's a Canaanite dialect related to Hebrew.
Oh,
Does that help?
no.
No? Well, anyway, let me get to the point of my story. Encyclopedia Britannica. People think Encyclopedia Britannica is wonderful, solid source of information. Our professor brings in the latest issue or latest edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, has us look up Ugaritic in the encyclopedia, and we look at it. They have a picture of an Ugaritic tablet on the page, and we look at it. It's upside down. It took them 3 editions before they fixed it.
Is our edition right side up?
I don't recall.
Okay,
Is
we'd have to look
Uber-
at
I
it.
think it is.
Well, we went to the Egyptian Rosicrucian Museum,
yeah, so
and
what-
that couldn't. I think it was cuneiform.
Yes, it was upside down in
Yeah.
some of the displays.
Yeah.
Also, Sky and Telescope magazine, a few years ago, they did something on Sumerian astronomy, and they had Sumerian tablet as a background. It was upside down.
Is Ugaritic for ogres?
Yeah, it's Ugaritic.
Also, there was a Schwarzenegger film, I'm trying to remember the title of it, where they had Aramaic text in the background. Aramaic that is, Hebrew uses the Aramaic alphabet. So they have these Aramaic texts in the background.
I know, but he gets close.
They look
I'm
like Hebrew.
Freaks
They're
me out.
all upside down. So, Wikipedia. Back to Wikipedia. The way you use an encyclopedia, Wikipedia is no different, is it gives you a summary of what's going on, and then it has references. The references are what make an encyclopedia useful because they say, okay, here's a summary of the topic. For further research and more information, here are the different books, articles, things that you can look at to get this stuff in depth and find out what the sources were for what we wrote in this encyclopedia. That's why Wikipedia is useful, because it will begin for you what you need to find out about a
It's
topic.
actually better than the old-fashioned encyclopedias because someone can go in and fix a mistake.
Yeah.
Whereas with your Encyclopedia Britannica, nobody comes to your house, cuts out the wrong section and glues in the correct section.
Yeah, although the
Although
Soviet
you do
Union,
get the yearbooks.
yeah,
That
you do get
update it.
yearbooks. In the old Soviet Union, they actually would do that.
Really?
Yeah, if somebody fell out of favor, you'd get this thing in the mail, a new page. And they'd instruct you to take a razor blade, cut out the old page, and stick this one in its place. So they almost did that sort of thing.
That's too funny.
I think it was, again, my Ugaritic teacher at UCLA, Stanislav Zegert. He was from Czechoslovakia, from Prague. And he happened to be out of the country at the time when the Russian tanks moved in 1968. He never went back. He ended up at UCLA. So anyway, but he's got stories about what it used to be like in the old Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc. Not a good place.
No.
Which is, again, why the free press is such a wonderful thing.
It hurts. I have a headache.
Okay.
It's turning to be bad.
So the press needs to be as free as possible.
Yes.
Even though a lot of the times they're quite stupid.
Yes.
But it's better than the alternatives.
Yes. Yeah,
So-
not having any news at all or state-run news.
Right,
That's a
very
thing.
bad.
Yeah. So, we will start our sign-off.
Yeah, we might as well start a
Process.
sign off because it's 4:57. So
Okay, next week our topic is,
I told you,
and I've forgotten.
and you forgot.
Did you forget?
No, our topic next week will be transparency. Not all. What was the subtitle?
Something about privacy.
Yeah, privacy isn't everything it's cracked up to be.
Okay.
Um,
I think that'll be an interesting topic because you can talk about, like knowing things about like criminals and stuff like that, and we have some of that with like the Megan's Law website and things
Right.
like that. So I think
as well
that'll
as
be
just
an interesting
transparency in your own life. That is one of the hard things for a lot of people is to be the same person no matter where they happen to be. I mean, you are a little different, say, in your job than you would be at home, but still, it should still be you.
You're right. Sometimes I wear my pajamas to work, but that's because it's pajama day,
You
and
want-
it's okay to do in
Now,
elementary
we want to
school.
avoid the problem of Eleanor Rigby, who
Yes.
kept her face in a jar by the
Which
door.
I did not know that's what it meant. I just thought it was about a woman who put on a lot of makeup.
No, at least when we analyzed.
But I wasn't raised on the Beatles because the Beatles were going to be the downfall of American civilization.
Didn't work.
No, that
Ah.
probably came from
But in high school, my English professor had us analyze that particular thing, and that was one of the
Yeah,
conclusions we
I
came
wasn't
to,
raised
that
on
the idea that
Beatles.
she was putting on this face whenever she'd go outside. Because that's what a lot of people do. They
Right.
become a different person outside than what they really are. So, anyway,
okay.
next week we'll talk about that.
So Mirror Darkly is brought to you by Quartz Hill School of Theology and Quartz Hill Community Church. They are both located in Quartz Hill, California. If you are local and you want to take some classes in person, we do offer classes here at 51st Street West and Avenue K. If you're looking for a church to worship at and learn the Word, we actually start a new sermon series tomorrow. Why is there kale? So that
Which is
is
designed, the title is supposed to be humorous.
yes. So come
Could
and
be
learn why there's
why is there
kale.
fruit cake, or why do the Dodgers sometimes lose, or whatever.
I like the kale one better. So anyway, and I actually used your picture for the first slide in
really?
the sermon slides. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
so why
what
is there
does-
kale?
What does suffering tell us
And
about God?
right, and that's 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. If you want to join us on Facebook, the Quartz Hill School of Theology has its own Facebook page. Quartz Hill Community Church has its own Facebook page, and you can join us there. We live stream our services, including the worship, the announcements, the whole 9 yards, every Sunday morning at 11 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. So if you live out of the area and you want to check us out, you can. If you live in the area and you're looking for a place to worship and you just want to kind of give us a test drive, you can join us online or join us in person because we have a very nice little church here. It's very cozy. So come check
And
us
the
out.
AC works.
Yes, the air conditioning works now, and so does the plumbing.
Yes.
Yeah, we had a leak, an unfortunate leak, or
That's
a terrible
been
leak.
fixed.
It was the terrible leak. It was a story we used to read in 3rd grade.
Ah,
The
okay.
terrible leak. But anyway,
I think I remember that.
do you remember that story in our purple reading books?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she went to my school. So anyway, so we will see you next Saturday to talk about transparency, and at 4:00 p.m. on Saturday Pacific time.
Right.
So now we're gonna go celebrate our daughter's birthday.
Hi. Bye.
Bye.